Let's get some business news now from Brian Quinn, who joins me in the studio. Brian, let's start with a story picked up for us, America's opioid epidemic. And of course, the makers of OxyContin have reached a plea with federal prosecutors. This is significant, isn't it?
It is, Tom. Purdue Pharma is the maker of OxyContin. They are pleading guilty to criminal charges over the promotion and distribution of that painkiller, that highly addictive painkiller that has played such a huge role in America's devastating opioid addiction crisis. The company hit with $8 billion in penalties, though most of those will go unpaid. Purdue is going to pay just $225 million out of a $2 billion criminal forfeiture as it undergoes bankruptcy restructuring that will distribute the remainder of that penalty to U.S. communities currently suing the company. Criminal and civil fines totaling some $6.3 billion will have to also compete with creditors and plaintiffs. The billionaire Sackler family that owns Purdue will pay just $225 million in a separate civil penalty with no criminal charges filed against them yet. A separate criminal investigation into individuals remains ongoing. Well, some state prosecutors have complained that the deal lets the company off too easily after some 470,000 American deaths from opioid abuse over the past 2 decades. Prosecutors sought to focus on putting the firm's asset to use in undoing the damage it's caused. Take a listen.
The agreed resolution, if approved by the court, will require that the company be dissolved and no longer exist in its present form. It would require that the Sacklers must relinquish all ownership and control of the company or of any of its successors, and the company's assets would be transferred to a new public benefit company, or PBC, owned by a trust for the benefit of the American public.
Our next European agriculture ministers have reached a long-awaited deal on the EU's next common agricultural policy. The 6-year plan is the bloc's largest budget item. The new deal assigns a significant chunk of funding for environmental protection and fighting climate change, though activists say it doesn't go far enough. Selena Sykes has the details.
It's taken nearly 2 years, but the European Union is finally on the cusp of overhauling its agricultural policy. Agreed by the bloc's 27 agricultural ministers, the new policy aims to become more aligned with the EU's climate change commitments, while supporting farmers' livelihoods.
Balance dahingehend, und das wird jetzt unterlegt, und wir werden die belohnen, die mehr für die Umwelt machen, für das Klima machen, aber dennoch dafür sorgen, dass wir jeden Tag Nahrungsmittel auf den Tisch bekommen. Und deshalb ist es so wichtig, dass weiterhin auch die Einkommenssicherung gewährleistet ist.
With a set budget of around €387 billion over 7 years, the Common Agricultural Policy accounts for the biggest share of EU spending. Under the agreement, farmers will have to respect stricter environmental regulations if they want to receive financial aid. Ministers agreed that 20% of payments to farmers will be earmarked for green schemes, such as organic farming and agroforestry. Farmers will not be able to access this money for other purposes. Some Eastern European countries voiced concern about tying funds to environmental aims, warning that the money would be left unspent. Meanwhile, the Greens in the European Parliament said more than 2/3 of subsidies would still be paid without sufficient environmental protection conditions. Environmental campaigner Greta Thunberg also strongly criticised the agreement, saying it meant surrender on climate and environment. The green policy will now go to a vote in European Parliament. It is set to start from 2023.
Well, the EU's top Brexit negotiator is urging continued talks to salvage a last-minute trade deal with the UK. Michel Barnier pledging to work day and night to keep the UK from crashing out of the European single market on January 1st. Hopes for a deal have dimmed lately, with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson warning his country to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. The European Council president has accused the UK of wanting to, quote, have its cake and eat it too, as London tries to keep EU fishermen out of British waters while maintaining access to European financial markets. Well, the British government, though, now says it's ready to resume talks Thursday at a stepped-up pace following Barnier's remarks. Here he is Wednesday in Brussels.
Je pense, mesdames et messieurs les députés, malgré les difficultés, qu'un accord est à notre portée. Si nous sommes des deux côtés prêts à travailler constructivement et dans un esprit de compromis, si nous avançons dans les prochains jours sur la base de textes juridiques, comme c'est notre souhait, et enfin surtout si nous sommes prêts dans les jours qui viennent à venir aborder et résoudre les sujets les plus difficiles.
On time now for a check on the day's trading action. Wall Street seesawing on Wednesday as investors wait for developments on a new economic stimulus package in the U.S. The White House and congressional Democrats hoping to reach a deal by the weekend despite opposition from Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. The Dow just barely above the flat line currently, with the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq each up around 0.4% respectively. European indexes closed deep in the red as investors on the continent appeared pessimistic on the possibility of a U.S. stimulus deal. The British pound jumping 1.7% on those renewed hopes of a Brexit deal. That, though, not doing London's FTSE 100 any favors. It closed down nearly 2%. CAC 40 here in Paris down around 1.5%, with the Frankfurt DAX not too far behind it at the end of the day. Meanwhile, in Frankfurt Wednesday, environmental activists held a protest outside the European Central Bank. Demonstrators setting a model globe on fire as they demanded the ECB stop using coronavirus bailout measures to prop up fossil fuel companies and heavy polluters. Under its principle of market neutrality, the ECB has purchased billions of euros in bonds from companies like Shell and French oil giant Total. A study released this week by the UK's New Economics Foundation has shown that 63% of ECB bonds are attached to industries incompatible with the Paris Climate Accord. Activists say the coronavirus crisis is an opportunity to reshape the European economy by funding renewable energy instead of fossil fuels.
Ja, auch im Rahmen der Corona-Hilfsprogramme sind wieder Milliarden in die zukunftsfeindliche, dreckige fossile Industrie wie Kohle, Öl und Gas geflossen. Und die Corona-Krise zeigt, radikale Veränderungen sind möglich. Es ist richtig und wichtig, auf die Wissenschaft zu hören. Und das muss auch für die Klimakrise gelten. Es kann nicht sein, dass wir im Versuch, die Corona-Krise zu lösen, die Klimakrise weiter befeuern.
Some more of today's top business headlines we're following for you at this hour. Cathay Pacific has announced it's cutting 8,500 jobs and closing its Cathay Dragon subsidiary. The Hong Kong-based airline is scrambling to cut costs as the COVID-19 pandemic has cratered the air travel industry. Cathay received a $5 billion bailout from the Hong Kong government in June, but continues to lose some $260 million per month. And Monsanto has lost a final appeal in French court over its liability for a farmer's health damages following his accidental inhalation of its weed killer Lasso. The farmer had sought damages of roughly 1 million euros. Monsanto is still facing a raft of lawsuits in the US over its Roundup pesticide. And finally, for business, time to stock up on the mom jeans. The Gap is considering the closure of a significant number of its European locations by next summer. The iconic casual clothing chain has some 130 stores across the continent. A restructuring plan in the works would see outlets in the UK, France, Ireland, and Italy shut down for good. Union sources say French employees have already been informed that all 22 locations in the country are slated for closure. The Gap facing not only an industry-wide drop in sales due to the coronavirus, but also mounting competitions from fast fashion rivals like Zara and H&M. The Gap actually pretty popular here in France, Tom. I didn't realize it until I moved here. I thought it would be really much more of an American thing, but the French are kind of into it. It's too bad.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that business news update, Brian Quinn.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'll be back in a couple of minutes with the top stories. Stay with us.
America is